let's take a closer look at some of the Paul McCartney songs from 1968. I've chosen, I mean, there's so many good ones you could talk about, right? So I'm sorry there are only three here. But I'm going to talk about his two singles, Lady Madonna and Hey Jude, both of which were #1 singles in the UK. The first one, Lady Madonna, #4 in the spring of '68 in the US, and Hey Jude, #1 in the US in the fall of '68. And then I'll talk about Obla Di, Obla Da. And I've chosen them not because I think they're like my favorite songs or, you know, the best songs or something, but because they help flesh out the narrative, the interpretation that I'm trying to offer of the development of Paul McCartney as a songwriter. The first one, Lady Madonna. And what I'm going to say about Lady Madonna and Hey Jude is that both of them represent a conservative, a turn toward a more conservative approach. In other words, knowing with Lady Madonna that he needed a hit single. And knowing with Hey Jude, he was writing a single that he hoped would be a hit single. Paul and John too both go back to the formula more when they know they need a hit than they do for some of the more album-oriented tracks. And so, in many ways, the singles can be seen as more conservative, musically speaking, album tracks as being more progressive. Now, somebody want to say, well, are you trying to tell me Strawberry Fields wasn't progressive? No, it's a general statement, right? There are going to be exceptions, but generally speaking, when they know they need a hit, they depend on their craft to make that happen, and you can hardly fault a musician for that. I'm just pointing it out as we go along here. So Lady Madonna and Hey Jude are pretty good examples of that, I think. Lady Madonna, a broken AABA form. We've talked about this broken AABA form from back in '65 and '66. Songs like Nowhere Man and Michelle, broken AABAs. And what we mean by that is the core of the song is an AABA tune, but the way in which the parts return does not exactly fit the AABA structure. So in the case of this one, we get AABA, ABABA, like that. That's not exactly what we see when we see an AABA with partial return or partial reprise, or an AABA with full reprise. So we've seen that form before. There's nothing the least bit ambitious or adventurous about that. It's like he's going with a safe solution. The piano part on Lady Madonna is influenced by a tune from 1958 called Bad Penny Blues, and you should look this up on the internet and listen to it because you'll immediately hear the similarity. It was recorded by a fellow by the name of Humphrey Lyttelton, and you may wonder, well, how did Paul know about that? Is that something they were playing in Liverpool? Well, it turns out that George Martin produced that record, so it's likely Paul learned about it from George, Bad Penny Blues. So he's sort of doing that on the piano. According to Paul, he says that when he was doing Lady Madonna, he thought of himself as pretty much doing Fats Domino. It was that sort of Fats Domino, boogie-woogie piano kind of thing. According to Ringo, he says Lady Madonna is clearly Paul doing Elvis. But whether it's Fats Domino, or whether it's Elvis, or whether it's Humphrey Lyttelton from 1958, we're talking about, you know, records that Fats Domino, Elvis, and Humphrey Lyttelton that were all recorded at about the same time, that first blush of rock and roll and very, very strong R&B influence on that. You may look at the words here and see that the song, Paul has said in the past that in many ways Lady Madonna celebrated, you know, the hard time that women can have in the world, and he's not sure how they're able to do all the things that they're able to do and this kind of thing. So it's almost a kind of an appreciation of the sort of ideal woman in Lady Madonna and all the things they have to keep track of in their lives. If you look at the word play, he uses the word run in two different senses. The first sense about children running, and then when he comes back to the same place in the tune again in the form, it's then stockings are running. So you sort of get the running of a stocking, the running of a child, playing on the idea of, it shows that the guy's still sort of giving some attention to the craftsmanship of the lyrics, playing with words in a fun kind of way. So one additional thing we can take away from this, and from a lot of the tunes that we're going to be talking about on the White Album, is how not psychedelic it is. Remember that just before this, we'd had Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in the summer of 1967, All You Need Is Love, Magical Mystery Tour, and all that went with that. And here is a couple months later, early in 1968, and this doesn't sound psychedelic at all. There's a clear kind of, I wouldn't say rejection of psychedelia, but look at the album cover for Sgt. Pepper, look at the album cover for Magical Mystery Tour, oh, look at the White Album cover. What is it? White. How much more non-colorful can you be with regard to, sound a little bit like the guy in Spinal Tap, none more black, none more white. I mean, the album really sort of rejects, at least distinguishes itself from psychedelia. I don't want to say rejects because there are certainly still elements of psychedelia in terms of the creative process, especially with the John songs. We'll get to that. We move on to Hey Jude now, a song, again, a big hit in the fall of '68 for the Beatles. The typical story on this song is that it was written for Julian Lennon. It was originally called Hey Jules. Paul went out to visit Cynthia and Julian after the breakup with John, and John going with Yoko and all that. And he actually was kind of a favorite uncle to Julian, who's commented that he probably has more pictures of him playing with Paul than playing with his dad. I don't know. I don't want to get into the family end of this. You can never believe what anybody says. You have a family. You know what I'm talking about here. But nevertheless, Paul wrote the song about Julian, but then decided that wasn't so easy to sing. So instead of Hey Jules, it was Hey Jude. Now, John Lennon has said, well, I never heard the story about him writing it about Julian. I thought he was writing the song about me. I thought Hey Jude was directed directly at me. Now you've found her, now go and get her, talking about my relationship with Yoko and all that. And then others have said, no, maybe it's Paul talking about himself and the breakup with Jane Asher. And so who knows? I mean, that's the great thing about song lyrics. If you define them too much, they stop being as richly meaningful. But nevertheless, the official explanation is it's a song about Julian Lennon, telling him how to take a bad situation and turn it into something that could be much better. It's pretty conservative. It's an AABA form. With a partial reprise. That part of it goes back to 1963, Paul wanting a big hit, and so he's going back to the formula. But what's not part of the formula here is the long ending, right? The sing-along at the very end. After the song is complete, there's a coda, and a coda, of course, the coda means tail. Well, this is a very long tail on this animal. Indeed, the song runs to 7 minutes, longer than anybody could ever think of having a song on AM radio. But it was the Beatles, and it was a #1 hit, and people played all 7 minutes of it in many cases, with Paul doing his sort of Little Richard screaming thing at the end. Whenever I play in a band, everybody's vying to do the Paul bit at the end because everybody thinks they can do it just like him. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. So anyway, it's conservative in the first half of the tune. And the second half, having this big long ending on it, is really quite innovative, and we're sort of starting to head toward the Paul McCartney epic track, I think. One last word about this. It really is another installment in the Paul as singer-songwriter succession, except in this time instead of sitting with the guitar, with a singer-songwriter, any kind of an acoustic instrument sort of says authenticity. So if you're sitting at an acoustic guitar singing a song and people are focusing on the lyrics, that says authenticity to the listener. If you're sitting at an acoustic piano and delivering the song in that way, that says authenticity. Think about the 70s singer-songwriters, Carole King, James Taylor, people like that, Carly Simon, that Paul Simon. That's kind of the formula. Well, this is where a lot of that gets started here. And so Hey Jude is in many ways a kind of a prototypical singer-songwriter kind of tune, and so makes a contribution that way. The last song I want to talk about with regard to Paul here is Obla Di Obla Da. The song itself, a contrasting verse-chorus with bridge, is kind of interesting from a formal point of view. That is, the verses and the choruses are contrasted from each other. So from that point of view, it's a contrasting verse-chorus. But if you take the first verse-chorus pair and the second verse-chorus pair, then insert the bridge, which is the next thing that happens, and the next verse-chorus pair, you get kind of an overall AABA structure if you think of the verse and the chorus sort of acting together as a kind of A section. So you get A verse chorus, A verse chorus, bridge, A verse chorus, and then a partial reprise. You get the bridge again, and then the A verse chorus again. So we see him doing something bigger with the form, but following an overall outlay that's not so different from Hey Jude that we just talked about a minute ago. It tells a story about two people. One of them is a singer in the band, and another one owns a market. He sees her, and they fall in love. They have kids, and in the end, it's a happy kind of domestic bliss kind of situation. That's exactly the story of the Coasters' Little Egypt from 1961. And we already mentioned Little Egypt when we were talking about the rhyme scheme in the bridge of George's Taxman. So it leads me to believe that Paul knew that song and knew the sort of story and kind of adapted it. But he did it in a kind of reggae, what he thought of was kind of a reggae kind of style or voice. That, in fact, the saying "Obla-di, Obla-da," and the rest of it that goes with it. I'm not going to say it because I don't need the Apple people suing me over copyright, but you know what goes on. That phrase was something that apparently a musician that he knew, a Jamaican musician, used to say all the time. So he was kind of borrowing that phrase to use. Anyway, the style is usually thought of as being most influenced by a contemporary artist of the time, a reggae artist by the name of Desmond Dekker. So even the Desmond in the song seems to tip off the stylistic debt to Desmond Dekker, and that's why I classified that earlier as a song that was influenced by other styles. When we think about it telling a story, though, Obla-di, Obla-da, we can put it in a song string of Paul songs that starts at least as early as Eleanor Rigby, For No One, right, on the Revolver album, then Penny Lane, then She's Leaving Home. We get this one, Obla-di, Obla-da, and then on Abbey Road we're going to get Maxwell's Silver Hammer, another one. These sort of Paul tells a story about things that are going on. In the case of Obla-di, Obla-da, it's a whimsical kind of tale, and in the case of Maxwell's Silver Hammer, it's a kind of sardonic tale of well, we'll talk about it when we get to it, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. So having looked over these three Paul songs with regard to 1968, two of the singles and one of the songs from the White Album, let's now turn to a discussion of John's songs on the White Album.